are 100% capable, responsible to interact and teach with each student, right? We don't just, as an ESC teacher, I don't just work with my students, right? I can work with students who are general education who do not have an IEP. I can work with them. If they're at the same skill level, say I'm doing an alternative or a differentiated group, and I pull some kids back. If there's a general ed kid that needs that same skill, I can pull that kid into my group and work with them, okay? Here's the caveat. The number of gen ed kids can't outnumber the number of ESC kids in my group. Because ESC would be my primary responsibility, right? That would be my primary responsibility. But that it does not exclude me from working with students who do not have IEPs, okay? Because we're gonna work smarter, not harder. We're working together, right? Two teachers in the classroom, we're both working. We're not assisting and we're not observing. So we are working with all children, okay? Questions about that? Because that is often misunderstood. Be honest, okay? Are there any questions about that? Okay, as an ESC teacher, my primary responsibility are my students with IEPs, right? Because I'm responsible for the IEP. You guys get to learn about that this afternoon. Phew, that's gonna be fun. But again, it doesn't exclude me from working with students who do not have an IEP. All right, are we good? Please, ask if you have a question. Don't be afraid. Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
Please.
We are very lucky at Icon that we have Newman, because that's exactly what she does. When she comes in for our ESC babies, she services all our kids, and she's very open to collaborate and co-teach with the gen ed teacher. So kudos to her.
Oh. This is being recorded. Perhaps this could be evidence. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, because that is exactly how it should be. Think about it from this perspective, and then I'm going to stop for a second. If I only, as the ESC teacher, come down and work with the same kids day after day after day, what have I just done? I just identified those kids. Those are Miss Phillips' kids. Right? And we don't want to do that. Right? And that's working harder, not smarter anyway. I have a problem with that. Okay, Monica.
Yeah. So, before planning the collaborative lesson, think about your non-negotiables. Things that you wanna plan out with your team teacher, that is non-negotiable. Perhaps if that teacher likes to sing and you don't like to sing, maybe you wanna say, hey, calm the singing down a little bit, Perhaps, it might be a situation where you wanna make sure that you go over certain points. So you wanna make sure that whatever those non-negotiables are for you, that you have that discussion with that partner prior to the lesson.
All right, before we move on, okay, I know there's some good non-negotiables out here. All right, so share with us, what is a non-negotiable in your classroom? Like if you have a collaborative teacher in your classroom, what is a non-negotiable in your classroom? Say it again.
I said behavioral expectations.
Behavioral expectations? Okay, so that you both have to have behavioral expectations? Good, what else?
Well,
Say that again? Equality, right, because, and we use the term parity when we're talking about collaborative teaching approaches, and that just means both of you have the same authority, the same responsibility, the same power, whatever. You got both of you, it's equal. What else? What's a non-negotiable?
Constructive criticism is in private, not in front of the kids.
That's right. And if Johnny goes to Miss Jackson, to Dr. Jackson and says, can I go to the bathroom? And she says no, and then Johnny comes to Miss Phillips, and Miss Phillips says, yes, honey, you can go to the bathroom. She's gonna have a problem with me, non-negotiable is, students getting up to sharpen pencils when the teacher is instructing. That is a non-negotiable. Doesn't happen, okay? You know, think about your, what about when a student is absent? What are your procedures? Think about, when do you write a referral? Do you write a referral? Or do you call? Or do you do a chat with the child? You have to talk all about that before you get in the classroom, before you get in that situation, and that breakdown between the adults happens. Because it can be bad. You wanna hear a funny story? Well, it really isn't funny. This is not funny. So I'm conducting a training, and this was several years ago. And it was, I don't know, I think it was in Urkel. We're in the media center. We're doing, I don't even know what the topic was at that time. It had to have been collaborative teaching. And we've got the collaborative partners paired up, and we're doing some activity. And I might have been being observed. And I start hearing, so I'm working the room, right? Checking in on groups, making sure they're on track, answering questions. And I keep hearing these voices escalate, escalate, escalate. Two teachers, I kid you not, had to be separated. They were collaborative teachers. Okay, so I pulled out my blue, and I'm over there, and I'm like, okay, so I hear you saying, and I hear you saying, and they're just going up. And I'm thinking, okay, administrators, where are you? I don't know these people, and it was bad. It was so bad. The administrator finally did come in and say, ladies, you know, let's take this outside. But man, I was sweating bullets. I was pulling every trick out of my pocket. Nothing. They were screaming at each other, right? In the media center, everybody else is like, there were many things that they did not have discussion about prior to, and it festered, and it seemed like this was January. So they've had like all of that first semester to really get ticked off, and it was so bad. It was so bad. So bad. So you gotta talk about it before it explodes. Okay, now let's
Let me
move
just
on.
piggyback on that.
Yes.
I had that same exact thing happen at one of my schools last year. And so the AP called me in, she's like, yeah, I have these two teachers, they don't get along, they don't, you know, they have to work together because one teacher worked inside that classroom. The one teacher whose classroom who it was didn't like the other teacher coming in. And I'm like, you know, it's not up to you. She has students in here that she needs to see. And so the AP wanted me to try to figure out how to help this situation. And a lot of it was lack of communication, lack of respect, and lack of planning together that created that situation. So definitely want to make sure you have those things in place.
Right, and so our next one, deal breakers. A deal breaker, so I want you to think for a moment, like if you were, and maybe you had this experience with another teacher in your classroom, you know, is there something that if it happened, that relationship or that collaborative pairing is just, it's broken, cannot be glued back together, no Gorilla Glue strong enough to put that relationship back together. All right, do you have some deal breakers in your class? Yes, what is your deal breaker?
When they, start talking about coming back.
Yeah, absolutely, because you know what? It happens so often, and that just makes you go, it always gets back.
Can you repeat what they said? I didn't hear it.
Okay, yes.
She said talking about you, about her behind your back, talking about somebody behind your back.
Talking behind the back, yeah, absolutely. Any other deal breakers?
Being completely disrespectful to the students?
Yes, completely disrespectful to the students, that's a good one. What else? Now we're getting somewhere, come on.
Talking the other from a
For disrespecting the other adult. Yeah. Yeah, talking down, right. Anything else?
Not being prepared.
Not being prepared, yeah, because what color is she? She's prepared and she's gonna have you prepared. Right, yep. Okay, very good. Anybody else wanna add anything else? Okay, yes.
If I go prepared, but like just refer to your partner's just lazy, like they put all the work on you.
That was our royalty clapping. That was our royalty clapping, yes, yes. You know, and I did do some collaborative teaching, at various stages in my career. And, I love it when, I would be in a gen ed classroom, right, as the ESC teacher, and I don't know, clarifying something, because that was kind of my thing that I could do. Well, Mr. Smith, do you mean, right? And I love when they would go, keep going, go ahead, I'm just gonna check this, go ahead, and I'm like, you know, that's all I got. I was gonna clarify, but they're like, oh, that's great, keep going. Yeah, yeah. No, you do it. You got it. Good. You're good. Keep going.
So the next one, rules and routines. Be on the same page with the rules that you're gonna have in that classroom setting. You know, have that discussion ahead of time, what the rules are for your students when they come in, what the routine is, you know, how do they get your attention? Do they raise your hand and just call out? You know, I think Lori talked about, you know, whether or not the student can get up and sharpen their pencil in the middle of your teaching. You know, have those discussions ahead of time, so that way you guys are all on the same page with what the procedures are for the classroom setting. It makes it a lot easier.
Okay, and so let me add a freebie. So you might have noticed that I brought in pencils, lots and lots of pencils in my bag, because I'm in classrooms a lot. I have pencils, lots and lots of pencils. Hypothesize why I carry pencils, lots and lots of pencils wherever I go. Field trip? Is it?
No, it's a pencil sharpener.
Pencil sh-
Prepared.
Oh,
Unprepared.
that's right, because here's the thing, and this happens at secondary all the time. Miss, I don't have a pencil, so they sit right there. Miss, I don't have a pencil. Okay. It's the 30th day of school. Johnny has not had a pencil yet. Who ultimately is gonna pay the price for Johnny not having a pencil? That's gonna be the teacher, because Johnny didn't do some work that went in the grade book that now is a 0 or worse, and then you get a phone call from the parent. Oh, who might have called the principal first? Okay, so not being prepared. This is a free UDL lesson, Universal Design for Learning. Remove the barrier. If they don't have a pencil, provide the pencil, okay? High school teachers like to go to the miniature golf places or the golf courses and ask for, not the golf balls, what are they asking? Those little bitty pencils. As a teenager, or as an adult, have you tried to write with those things? Okay, it's not super easy, but doesn't it? Come into my classroom again without a pencil, Lori, and you're gonna get your very own little pencil with no eraser, so don't make a mistake. Okay? So remove the barrier. If they don't have a pencil, give them a pencil. If you need a pencil, email me. I will send you pencils. Okay? All right, that was a freebie. Universal Design for Learning. That's another workshop. All right. Oh, consequences. So, yeah, look, Monica's trying to skip me. so consequences. You gotta talk from the get-go, all right? You gotta decide what your rules are, you gotta decide what those routines are, you gotta decide about those consequences, all right? If Lori doesn't have a pencil the first day, what are we doing? If Lori refuses, what are we doing? We gotta talk about that beforehand, because you don't wanna be in the midst of class and Monica is talking to Lori and Lori is getting a little heated. No, I'm not doing it. I don't want to. I don't feel like it. Call her. She'll never answer. Her number is, you ready? 386. Okay, so think about those things. Like, what would be referral worthy? What would be, so elementary, what would be like missing recess worthy? Okay, those kinds of things. And I'm telling you, you wanna think about it before you get in the midst of it. Because when you're in the midst of a situation, and you might be with a new collaborative partner, you might not be on the same page. You could be close, but you might not be on the same page. And if you're different, those kids are gonna pick up on that, and they just might run with it. All right.
So just like the consequences, you also wanna have a discussion about the rewards. Perhaps if little Johnny does not, like to work, if your work is to go to Miss class, and you say you go to Miss class at the end of the day, but if your team teacher doesn't know, you wanna have those discussions ahead of time to ensure that whatever the rewards are in that classroom, whether they're tangible rewards, some type of extra computer time, whatever it is that you're going to give to your students for a reward, make sure that you're on the same page, because you don't want to have one person, especially if it's tangible. Miss Smith is always the one bringing in the little goldfish, and you're never bringing in the goldfish. So now Miss Smith's mad because she's always spending her money. You're never spending your money, but then you're also eating the goldfish.
Okay, and this is a fun one. So difficult students. I will tell you that that's probably the one thing, like right off the bat, that if you have two teachers who are not on the same page, not in a relationship, that a difficult student could absolutely drive a wedge between you, right? They could drive a wedge between you. So you gotta figure out, how are we gonna handle this difficult student, all right? It shouldn't always be the same teacher, because once it becomes that, then the other teacher has no authority whatsoever, right? So I would almost be willing to say it's a tag team. I'm going and checking with Johnny, and then 2 minutes later, Monica's gonna come check with Johnny. We're gonna make sure that we are on top and that we're talking to that kid, right? Because those little pumpkins, man, they can push some buttons, can't they? They know just that button to push. And then that explosion could occur. But I told him he couldn't, Miss Phillips. I said no. I said he couldn't. And then Johnny's just sitting there. All right. This is good. Okay.
All right, so to sum it up, of course, collaborative teaching involves planning. Planning the strategies that you're gonna employ in your classroom setting, planning the routines and the rules that you're going to set forth for your classroom, as well as planning, to sum it all up, how you're going to handle misbehavior in your classroom. So it requires planning, it requires, communication, it requires you guys working together collaboratively. So now we're gonna move on to our service delivery continuum. And here's a picture of what it looks like. I'm not quite sure how well you guys can kind of see it. But of course, we have, we want our students in the regular classroom 80% to 100% of the school week. That's considered the regular class placement. Here we have the resource class. It's when a student is they pulled out and they're with their gen ed peers for 40 to 79% of the school week. We consider it separate class, where they're totally, not with their peers as much, when it's less than 40% with their general education peers. And then we also have other separate environments like hospital homebound, sometimes private school settings, or residential placements. And so for our delivery model, of course, we have the general education classroom setting. That's where our students, if you maybe have support, co-taught teaching going on, they're served in the general education setting. Sometimes, well, then that's actually without any type of ESC services. Here we have it where it's with ESC support, and the areas where we provide support would be consultation. Consultation is non-student direct. It's basically teacher to teacher, where the teachers are talking about how the kids are doing. Usually we'll have kids on consultation if perhaps they move through the continuum and now they're doing okay and they don't really need an ESC teacher coming in to support them, but you don't want to necessarily totally let them go. So then you basically just consult with the other teacher on how they're doing, making sure that they're still, understanding the content and making sure that they're passing their tests and reaching mastery. And so that is just teacher to teacher, so you're not working with an actual student. Then we have support facilitation. That model is a support teacher coming into a general education teacher's classroom setting, working with those ESC teachers, those ESC students. And like Lori mentioned earlier, even though the bulk of their responsibility is to service those kids who have disabilities. If you have maybe 3 kids who have, an IEP, and then you have 2 other kids who are just missing the content right there for a moment, you can pull those 1 or 2 kids into your group and work with them as well. But you don't want it to be lopsided where you have more gen ed kids in your group than you have the ESC students, because then it becomes, the focus is away from servicing them with their needs. We then also have the co-teaching model, where you have 2 teachers in the classroom at the same time delivering that instruction. We also have small group, where sometimes kids are pulled out. A lot of the time we'll deal with that when it's our speech and language pathologists, sometimes our occupational therapists. Those are the people that will come in and work with kids in small groups. And we also have CARS, which is counseling as a related service. Sometimes we have the counselors come out, they'll get the kids, take them for about 30 minutes, work with them and talk with them about some of their issues and needs. And then the next area right here, we have the resource separate class setting. This is where our students with disabilities are with just their peers. A lot of times it could be, once again, sometimes our occupational therapists might have this model, our speech and language pathologists might have this model. Our kids who have emotional behavior disabilities are oftentimes served in a separate class setting because they have specific strategies, skills, and needs that need to be addressed just for them. And so that is something that is done in that separate class setting. And we also have, now we have ASD classroom settings as well for some of our students who have ASD, and they might need a lot more structured skill set within that ASD classroom setting. But not all of our kids, of course, who have are on the spectrum need to be served in this situation, in that type of a model, as well as our students with disabilities. We have some students, our students who have emotional behavior disabilities. We have some kids who have that exceptionality, but they're still in the gen ed population because maybe they have developed some skill set and they've adapted and they know how to, maintain in that type of an environment. And then of course we have our last one, which is our other separate environments, which is usually our hospital homebound, some of our off-campus sites like Riverview or High Banks, if you guys have heard of that. And these are students who might have even greater need, and that's the greatest continuum that we have. They're getting our greatest need there.
And Monica, let me ask this, what services do we have here in elementary for students with disabilities? Is it in class, out of class, both? Both, okay. So we have in-class supports and out of gen ed class supports. And at your middle school?
Same.
In class and pull out? Yes, okay. Just curious, okay.
All right, so the next thing, we're gonna look at this form. This is considered our consultation form. So this is a form that if you are a consultation teacher, working with the kids who might still have an exceptionality, but they're being served in the general education setting. They're not getting any support from an ESC teacher. The ESC teacher would then have this log to fill out. to kind of show, you know, that you are communicating with that teacher on how that student is doing. And so if it were different subjects, you would put the teacher's name, you would put the subject that that teacher teaches, that teacher has to then put their initials, and then you, I mean, I know it's kind of hard to see, but you would just put the date. I would say this needs to be done at least monthly, sometimes every 2 weeks, depending on the need of the student, but at least monthly, you should touch base with that teacher and make sure that the kid is still, making progress. If your consultation log shows that the kid isn't making progress, maybe we need to come back to the table and look at what other needs the student might have. And this is also a form that would then go into the student's cumulative folder at the end of the school year.
Okay, and for our ESC teachers, the QR code it will take you right to the consultation log. And just to kind of add to what Monica is saying, so we know we have students with disabilities. We know we have students with disabilities who are in general education. So we know that we have a variety of delivery models that we can provide to support that student. So consult, remember, is the adult to the adult. And I would say the only caveat might be is if the student had some testing accommodations, that consult teacher might pull that student, like if there were some testing. Or it could be another ESC teacher. That might be the only contact that they have with that student, okay? But the consultation is really adult to adult.
Correct. And I like that you said that. Our students who have consultation, while they might not be direct service, they could have accommodations.
Yeah, and you're gonna talk about accommodations this afternoon. But we are required if a student has consultation. And let me ask this, I don't know if you know this yet, ESC people don't give them any clues. But who decides if a kid gets consultation or not? Bingo, the team, the IEP team, okay? Individuals, stakeholders for that particular child, sitting at the table, discussing those needs and coming to a decision about what supports. Okay.
So the next form we're gonna discuss is the support facilitation monitoring law. And this is for, an ESC teacher who pushes into a general education teacher's classroom, and you're working with maybe 3 or 4 kids, or 5 kids in that classroom on various, content areas. There's a form that you have to fill out, and every time you go into that teacher's classroom, you need to have this form, filled out to document all of your contact with those students. Back when I was a teacher, I used to just basically make a ton of copies, put it in a binder, and carry that binder with me, so that way at the end of that group, I would know, I would log my information right there. Had colleagues who, they would wait till the end of the week, kind of jot their stuff down, but that was the difference in us. I was that organized person and planner. I didn't want to have to think, on Friday, who did I see, what did I see, and what did I do? I did it at the end of every group that I worked with, but she was that person who procrastinated a little bit more, and she would wait till the end of the week, but then she'd also be that one saying, hey, what did I do on this day? So she had a hard time remembering sometimes. So for me, it worked better to have copies and a binder, carry that binder with me in my little cart, and at the end of my group, fill out this form. I know now you can, if you are a support teacher and you carry your computer, it can be done on the computer and documented that way. Oftentimes, the administrators will ask for this on a monthly basis. Sometimes they would ask for it quarterly, and that's a school-based decision. But for the most part, the consultation log, we fill out the student's name, and we have different types of teaching approaches. Some of the ones that we talked about today: parallel teaching, station teaching, team teaching. What type of approach did you work with that group with? As well as the specially designed instruction that Lori's going to talk about a little bit later. And then you talk about, did they master it? Continuing progress, minimal progress, or progress with adult prompting and support. And so you fill every one of these sections out. And then there's also a section at the end for any students who might be absent from that group. And that's really good, because it wasn't, back when I was a teacher, we didn't have that column, but it's really good, so that way when you go to IEP meetings, you can say, well, maybe Little John is not making progress because I see that he's missed out of the last 2 months, 5 of my group sessions, and you log that information here. So this is good data for you to take to meetings. This is good data for you to share with parents.
Okay, and here's what I'm thinking, I have, yes ma'am.
Those forms, should we be using them, in a group of students or individually?
So with support facilitation, it's the group, so that's the difference. The consultation is individual, the support is per group. And y'all don't know how lucky you are. I think you remember this, but when Lori was doing support facilitation, yeah, we had to do individual per kid. And it was not check the box, ladies and gentlemen. No, it was right.
Can I add to that though?
Absolutely.
If you're doing sport facilitation with a group of students and maybe someone moves in or someone has that service added, you have to start a new sheet. You can't just add their name onto it, yes? Because you have to document every time a student receives services. One of the reasons, well, I love the training here, one of the reasons we're here is because this paperwork was not filled out or not filled out with fidelity. So if it's not written down, if it's not documented, it doesn't happen. Yes? So in the ESC world, if it's not written down and not documented, it doesn't happen. The same thing goes for a student's IEP. So while you might be giving the student more supports, if it's not documented, it doesn't happen. If the kid needs it, write it down. If it's not written down, get to a meeting with the team and have a discussion about it. Cool? Yeah.
Is it enough for a classroom teacher if I'm giving accommodations to student, like in focus, for that assessment, you write those comments in, that way you can say, I provided this support, this is the second time they took this test, or whatever it is, I read the questions, whatever you're saying you provided, so it's in focus.
I would absolutely put it as a note in focus when you're giving any sort of assessment, because then I can go back and say, look, on this date they gave this assessment, and I know the teacher knows about the accommodation because they wrote it in there. Now, if the student continuously denies that accommodation,
Then write
you
that as
also
well.
have that documentation written down. So when you go to the meeting, say, hey, 8 out of 10 assignments, the student didn't take any extra time. And they only did it on these 2 times because they went to the bathroom for 15 minutes, right? So that helps you with all of your documentation. So write it down, get in the process of writing it down, putting it in focus.
That's a great, discussion, yes, if you don't write it down, it doesn't happen. And the notes in focus, I'm seeing more, particularly in grade programs, teachers document there, and that's not 30 in the 5, right? That's just adding to, so that's
Parents see
great.
that, right?
Yep.
They should be able to.
Yep.
Yeah, but let me just add this, and then I think we need to do like a 5-minute break, because we've been going for, about 2 hours now. The only other thing that I would say is if you have a student that is refusing an accommodation, make contact with that parent. Make contact with that parent. Don't let that go. And I'll tell you a little tip, because remember I work with 6 through 12. If I know that Johnny has the accommodation of having a reader, using a reader, right? And I know that we're in science, I'm not asking him, hey Johnny, you want me to read this to you? No. I go right up to Johnny and I'm like, okay, number 5. Yeah. Is it answer A? Yeah. B? Yeah. Okay, I'm really not giving them the choice. All right, now, I have to know the kids in order to do that. There are some kids that I probably wouldn't do that with. All right? Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break and at 11:07. What time are we supposed to do?
11.
Oh,
I had on my schedule from 8 to 11 and then 12 to 3.
oh.
Because I have to do fire alarm, like testing right now.
Okay. So, then how about we do this? How about you go to lunch and then we'll do, cause I know the second group had 1